lanes you're fitting in to then come up with how many spaces you're going to be required to provide. When you're doing your parking calculations, you cannot just come in here and say, we put in 100 spaces because I'm going to ask one. Your answer cannot be because that's how many fit. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a physical calculation where you are actually telling me numerical values based on something, right? So based on this table, you have to tell me why you're doing how many parking spaces you're doing. Okay? So if I'm proposing a bowling alley and I have 40 lanes, how many spaces am I required to have? I'm doing 40 lanes in my bowling alley, how many spaces do I need?
10.
I need 10, all right? Now that's my minimum calculation. You're gonna say, we have 40 lanes, 40 divided by 4, that gives me 10 spaces for my project. Now you can, after you do the calculation, say, we decided to put in 20 spaces because we had more room and we wanted to give some more parking options. But you can't go the other way where you say, we put 20 spaces because we felt like it and that's the space we had. You must first do the calculation and then you can tell me that you added more spaces for whatever reason you decided to add more spaces. All right? But if it's based on lanes, areas, seating, you have to then do the interior design of your project because you have to show me where that calculation came from. Okay? Now, the list is limited. There's not a whole lot that's shown here. But based on what they have, there's pretty decent abilities for you to then come up with something else. So let's say, for example, a Topgolf. Everybody familiar with the Topgolf facilities? There's nothing here that says anything of that nature. But looking at the list, what could you use to come up with a calculation for Topgolf? I could use recreation. Recreation could be a part of it. What else could I use?
I mean, could you use industrial use? Because like Topgolfs are normally like really big, or are we just talking about like the facility, not like the
Not the
driving
size,
range?
so the use isn't comparable to industrial, right? Because industrial, you wouldn't expect to have a lot of patrons, right? You wouldn't expect to have a lot of people coming to that facility. It would really only be the people that work there. So industrial would not necessarily be the same one-for-one swap, let's say. I would argue that you might even be able to use bowling, right? If you think about it, bowling and Topgolf have similarities where you're bringing people there, you're using a bay to perform the activity. So I would say bowling could be part of it, but Topgolf isn't just the golf, right? There's recreation that you could also fit in there. There's also restaurants. So you might do a three-part calculation here where you do some of it as bowling, some of it as recreation, and then some of it as seating for your restaurants, right? So there are combinations that you can make, and as long as you have a logical reason behind why you chose what you chose, that's okay for your calculation, okay? But again, you have to do an actual physical numerical calculation on one of your slides for your presentation. It cannot just be, we put in 100 spaces because we felt we wanted to put in 100 spaces, okay? It has to come from this resource right here, and you have to have the actual logic and numerical values behind it. Okay? Good? Questions? All right. Another document that we're going to use, and we're not going to talk too heavily about it today because we're going to have an entire lecture about this. This is going to be stormwater management. So there is a document, it's a technical manual called the Best Management Practices Manual. And for this, you're going to learn a little bit about stormwater design and doing very quick calculations as far as how much water is existing on the site and how much water will be proposed on the site in pre and post development conditions. So So we're gonna have an entire lecture about this, coming up with the calculations, but this is another resource that you're gonna learn a little bit about, where you have different chapters describing how stormwater is managed in New Jersey. Stormwater is a big deal in New Jersey because we wanna mitigate flooding. So this is something that applies to most projects where you would have to get a permit, you'd have to do calculations, you would have to figure out how much water is on your site and what you're going to do about it so that you don't have more water leaving your site than you did before you did your actual construction. Okay? So, any questions with those documents?
And also, this minus this.
Any questions on the intent of the project?
So, I just have one question.
Yep.
With the project itself, is there like a minimum amount of how much we could put into the project of the landscape, or yeah?
Landscape as far as the greenery, or just landscape as far as how expansive your project is gonna be?
Yeah, like how expansive that would be.
That's
Is there like
up to
a
you.
limit? Okay.
There's no limit. There are two restrictions, and I'll talk about them in 1 second. But we'll talk about the restrictions when we come back from the breakout rooms. I'm gonna split you guys up into your teams now. But I don't want you guys to go too big, because I want you to be realistic with the amount of time you have, and the larger your project is, the less detail you're gonna be able to put into it, all right? So I'm not one of those people that goes like, yeah, go huge and like do the entire town, because realistically, you don't have time to do that. I would rather you do a project on the medium side versus the large side, where you can actually dedicate to doing a good job and detailing it out, versus using a huge piece of land and then you just have nothing on it. All right, so that's my opinion. Now, if you guys are really comfortable and you're all superior CAD masters, go for it. I'm never gonna limit you in doing more work, but I do want you to be realistic with what you have to work with. So, I'm going to give you a color this time. Please remember your color, because that is how I will identify you for your groups, but based on those colors, you're going to go into a specific room number. So as you hear your name, please go into the appropriate room number. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys go into your groups. You'll be in there for several minutes so that you can get acquainted with each other, exchange information, figure out how you're going to be able to work on this project as well as your first project. Then I'm going to call you back. So please do not sign out, because once I call you back, we're going to talk more about the project. Okay? So I'm going to split you guys up into your teams, but when I call you back from the breakout room, don't sign off, because we're going to talk again. All right? But I'm going to leave you in your rooms for a little bit of time, maybe 15 minutes, so that you guys can talk, exchange ideas and information, and then I'm going to call you back and we are going to continue our discussion about the project. Okay, so please don't sign out. All right, so here we go. The red team is going to go in room 1. Red team is going to go in room 1, and it's going to be Elliot, Delfino, Andy, Oscar, Jeremiah, and Arian. Okay, so that's going to be room 1 for the red team. Room 2 is going to be yellow. 2 is yellow. That's going to be Thomas, Jack, Alejandro, Babacar, Mia. Okay, right, so that's yellow in room 2. Room 3 is gonna be green. Room 3 is green. It's gonna be Melissa, Ethan, Stefan, Julian, and Eric. And we have 2 Erics. Is that right?
I believe so, Professor.
3 wrong. Okay, so let's see.
I'm Eric Yu.
Eric U is going into, yep, green, room 3. Who's the other Eric? Do we have another Eric? Maybe not, but I thought I said Eric. Okay. Room 4